Hey y'all, Matt here. So around this time last year, I was preparing for my first international trip as part of an interterm travel course in the Philippines. The only travel experience I had prior was 2 cruises to Mexico, where I spent about 8 hours on land in each destination. I did a ton of research and I asked family members and friends for tips. What I noticed during and after the trip was that not many of my travel mates knew these tips and techniques, so I decided to compile a few of them and share them with you. I originally planned to make this video and a vlog series a while ago, but I've been quite occupied between school, work, and the fact that we're living in a pandemic, not to mention some technical issues with the camera of choice I picked for vlogging. But today's the day. Here are my travel tips that I've gathered from my first international trip. First, I will start off with some tips and recommendations to bring/do before the trip. This list will be a little biased towards tropical climates like the Philippines, so if you're following this in the future when we're allowed to travel again and are traveling to somewhere cold, these tips might not directly apply to you. The first thing I recommend is a visit to either your doctor, your primary care physician, or a place such as Travel Health Clinic. When traveling internationally, food and water have different bacteria that your gut might not be used to, which can result in some discomfort and maybe some long visits on the toilet. Also in tropical climates, you need to be wary of mosquitoes and the nasty things they carry. Your doctor or a place like a Travel Health Clinic will give you the advice on what extra shots you might need, some recommendations on how to stay safe from bugs, insects, foods to avoid, whether you can drink the water, etc. You should visit your doctor at least a month in advance, but if you're in a pinch, I recommend Passport Health. It does cost quite a bit more than visiting your doctor, but when you're pressed for time, it's a great substitute. I got a polio booster as recommended by the CDC, and also picked up some stuff for dealing with foodborne illnesses. A little bit more on this later. This brings me on to my second recommendation, which is bug spray, specifically 3 different types of bug spray. My biggest worry about the trip was the mosquitoes, which caused dengue and malaria, both of which were prevalent in the islands I was visiting. So many of you are familiar with DEET-based mosquito repellents, however, there are actually multiple different types for different purposes. I brought along 3 different bug sprays, a DEET-based lotion, a picaridin-based spray, and a permethrin-based spray. DEET is more effective on malaria-carrying mosquitoes, so I used this in areas where it was more prevalent. Outside of those places, I used a picaridin-based spray repellent, which is more effective on other species, and it's a little bit safer on the human body. The last one, permethrin, is a bit different from the previous 2. It's much stronger, but is harmful on human skin. This is helpful for clothing where it can actually last several washes. I sprayed my backpack, shoes, socks, outer layers like my windbreaker in this stuff to help repel mosquitoes that can linger on clothing and gear. It's a little overkill to have all 3, but I only ended up with 1 bug bite that happened when I forgot to apply repellent. Next on my recommendation list is a first aid kit. More specifically, some extra items to have on hand. It's always a good idea to have a first aid kit for any travel, with bandages, gauze, tweezers, etc. Going back to the first recommendation I made about Travel Health Clinics, I ended up picking up something that I used to help out a friend with food poisoning. I was recommended this thing called DiaRescue, which is something you take after you've started experiencing symptoms of traveler's diarrhea. I didn't have to use this on this trip, but it did help out my roommate on the trip after he ate some homemade chips that he purchased off the street. Another thing that's great to have is Travelan, which is taken beforehand to reduce the effects of traveler's diarrhea. I actually never ended up taking Travelan at any point in the trip, which was perfectly fine until I tried Jollibee. That was the one thing that got me a little bit sick. So plan your first aid kit accordingly and to your destination, but these are 2 things I suggest bringing along just in case you're going to be a little adventurous with your food choices. Another thing I recommend is purchasing some sort of travel charger adapter. Different countries have different plug standards and even different power standards, which means your current chargers might not be compatible with what's provided. A power adapter like this one I got off Amazon is good to have. Not only does it give you peace of mind that your electronics will charge safely, it's actually a great way to keep those chargers in one location so you're not losing track of them. As a filmmaker, this was very useful. I was charging pretty much everything at night. Phone, laptop, multiple cameras, spare batteries, etc. My next tip is about packing your luggage. When you travel, it's highly likely that you'll end up buying souvenirs and whatnot. Also, your clothing, when used and a little bit sweaty and unwashed, can gain a bit of weight. My remedy to this is to give yourself at least 10 pounds of wiggle room to whatever the maximum luggage weight is of your airline, which is typically about 50 pounds. My checked luggage weighed about 44 pounds when I got to LAX and ended up being exactly 50 pounds by the time I was at Ninoy Aquino Airport heading home. I recommend 10 pounds specifically because I actually had to move some items from my luggage to my 2 carry-ons to make the weight limit. I brought along a simple handheld luggage scale, which made this process very easy. No one wants to pay extra baggage fees for baggage, so put that money towards souvenirs and give yourself some extra wiggle room. Moving on to air travel specific items, first I'm going to start off with 2 app recommendations that I used on this trip and will be using for all future air travel. The first is this app called Timeshifter. No one enjoys jet lag, and this was one of my biggest concerns going into a 16+ hour time zone change. Timeshifter is an app that uses your personal preferences for sleeping times, behaviors, etc. to create sleep, light exposure, and caffeine/melatonin dose recommendations to adjust to a new time zone. For me, I chose not to do melatonin and just caffeine since I don't really have trouble falling asleep. The sleep, light exposure, caffeine dose schedule seems a bit weird at first, but the results speak for themselves. I actually had no jet lag going to and from the Philippines because of this app. I did have to endure close to 2 days without a proper amount of sleep because of the time difference, but waking up in Manila, I was energized and ready for the trip. Same goes for coming back to the States. I went to bed early for me at least, and woke up the next morning completely fine, adjusted to Pacific Standard Time. For a few hours difference, this might seem a little overkill, but in transoceanic flights, this is an absolute lifesaver. Your first trip is free on the app, but I'm absolutely willing to spend $10 on my next trip for another round of Timeshifter. My second app recommendation is an app called App in the Air. It's a travel assistance app suited for air travel, as the name suggests. Here you can book and manage your flights as well as receive up-to-date notifications on any delays, gate changes, etc. The auto check-in feature is one of my favorite parts of the app. For domestic flights, you're automatically checked in the second check-in opens online. No need to sit at your computer and wait. This came in handy when I was traveling within the Philippines, but this would be perfect for those traveling in the US going state to state. This app also manages your airline mileage club points. This is incredibly helpful if you're part of multiple mileage club systems. App in the Air also includes a lot of useful information on many airports. Here you can find maps and restaurant food recommendations, etc. On top of all this, App in the Air is actually quite fun to use with friends and family. There's a leaderboard from miles and country/destinations visited. This is an app I'd recommend for those who like to simplify information and data while traveling. My final 2 tips are on booking flights. The first is actually more of a strategy for booking flights. If possible, you'll obviously want to book flights as early as possible, but to really maximize those savings further, Tuesdays and Wednesdays tend to be the cheapest days to travel. I also recommend using Google Flights to track ticket prices. I was able to book a flight on ANA for $700 back in December. I picked a Wednesday flight and had Google Flights send me daily price alerts, which allowed me to swoop in and purchase these tickets. The ticket price the next day rose back up to $3,500. My second flight tip and final tip for this video is to give yourself at least 3 hours between layovers. I got this tip from a travel agent, and this pretty much applies to booking separate flights together, which I had to do coming back home. For reference, I took Philippine Airlines from Puerto Princesa to Manila, and then took ANA to Tokyo, and then back to LAX. I couldn't find a reasonably priced flight from Puerto Princesa to LAX, and I wanted to fly ANA again, so I ended up doing it this way. I incidentally ended up with a 4-hour layover, which might seem undesirable, but helped me avoid the stress and the 2 hours of phone calls my friends had to make when the flight from Puerto Princesa to Manila was delayed by about 90 minutes. Luckily, my friends made their flight from Manila to LAX with 15 minutes to spare before final boarding, but any further delay would have caused them to miss that flight. So remember, give yourself 3 hours when booking separate flights. You'll save yourself from a massive headache. Hopefully you found this video interesting or useful, and if you have any suggestions or want me to pursue the vlog series, leave them down in the comment section below. Maybe next summer we'll be able to travel the world once again. Bye for now.